Never be afraid to raise your voice for honesty and truth and compassion against injustice and lying and greed. If people all over the world would do this, it would change the earth. And this week's opening quote comes from William Faulkner. Welcome to Surviving the Matrix, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Maxwell Egan. It's a pleasure to be with you once again, and I will be your host for the next hour. The concept of good and evil is something that even when looking at this control mechanism, there's a propensity for us to look at the mechanism itself and not what lays behind the mechanism. You know, we're given all sorts of things to point our finger at. We can point the finger at anything we want. We can construct a relatively good presentation to prove it to anybody what we want. But is it necessarily true, and is that necessarily what should be the point of focus? I think really, you know, if we look at the Freemasons, we look at the Jesuits, we look at the Vatican system, we look at whoever you want to look at, you find that there is actually something behind that. And what that is really an all-pervasive evil that exists in this world. And what is really wrong with us is our inability to see this, and our need to follow orders and to not listen to our moral compass in our actions. I've talked about this so often on the show for so many years, but someone who has done a great deal of work on this, I think actually outstanding work in this field, and brought some very, very relevant information to people, is Mark Passio. And it's actually my pleasure to have Mark on the show today to discuss some of these things and some of the concepts that he has about this, and generally the state of the world today and where Mark sees us going. Welcome to the show, Mark. Nice to have you on, brother.
Max, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, I've actually wanted to have you on for a while. It's sort of difficult for us both to catch up with each other, both being quite busy. But what do you think about this, Mark? I mean, the state of the world today, really, we're given so many rabbit holes to go down, and I've been asking people to maybe pull their heads out of their rabbit holes a little bit and just focus on what's going on around them, and that the point that if we were to change our moral compass and simply to do the right thing in all that we do, we wouldn't even have to construct a new system. It would have to change around us if we could find this within ourselves to do this. What do you think about that sort of a concept?
I think it all comes down to the difference between right and wrong behavior, and pretty much nothing else. And that has a lot to do with the way children are raised, and with parenting, and whether parents are doing a good job communicating a proper set of moral values to their children. And I don't see that being done. I see quite the opposite being done. I see value as being only having to do with the monetary system being taught to children. I see obedience taught to children. I see respect for authority being taught to children. But I see very little in the way of true moral values and the communication of the true difference between right behavior and wrong behavior being ingrained, especially in the young. And therein lies the problem. When children aren't taught these values, they grow into adults who don't care about those values, and then ultimately have children of their own, and the cycle is perpetuated. And I don't see a lot of progress being made in this regard. I see some people waking up to it and learning it, but I consider that they are in kind of small, isolated pockets. They have an ability, though. They have the potential to become teachers and purveyors of this information if they develop the will to move forward and speak out on their own and become teachers in their own right. And help others to learn what they are doing that's wrong, that's ultimately creating a lot of chaos and suffering in our world by choosing behaviors that are not aligned to rights and are not aligned to natural law.
That's the problem, really, isn't it? Stepping outside natural law and being adherent to legislation, the laws that they give us and claim that they are laws. And these laws, so-called laws, are always causing us to step outside our moral compass. It's incredible. Like something I was saying the other day, really, when you look at it, Black's Law, the whole book, Black's Law, essentially it isn't a law book. It's a grimoire. It's a book of spells. It makes people believe that you have to do what these words say, no matter how much it makes you step outside of your morals, and no matter how much pain you inflict on others to support these rules. It's a really, really bizarre thing.
That's right. You know, with how I define natural law is the inherent dynamics of consequences that are built into the universe for the behaviors that beings with the capacity for conscience choose. So, conscience is the knowledge of the difference between right behavior and wrong behavior. Then we have to exercise our free will to choose the right behavior over the wrong behavior. And when we do that, and we make the right decision, there's a certain set of consequences that go into effect in the real world, and that is called order. And when we ignore our free will to choose rightly, and we make a conscious free will decision to do wrong behavior instead of do what we know to be right, and we all inherently really deeply understand what it is to be wronged and therefore not to do that to other people, and yet we always make justifications for why it's fine for us to do that because of something we needed or some situation we wanted or some situation we wanted to avoid. When we choose these wrong behaviors instead of the right ones, we have another set of consequences that come down on us through the natural world, and that's called chaos. That's called slavery. And that's where we're at right now. We're at a place where so many people in the aggregate numbers in society have chosen immoral behavior over moral behavior that we are in a position of chaos and slavery as a result. And people don't understand that the causal factors of this are not just some elite group that is running things. It's all the immoral people who conduct the sick, psychopathic, twisted bidding of this psychopathic ruling class and don't care whether their behavior is not aligned with right or not. And they're just order followers who are going along to get along, doing what they're told, ignoring all the moral consequences that go with choosing this immoral, wrong behavior, and therefore creating more and more suffering and chaos in the world unconsciously, not even really understanding how they are choosing this behavior unconsciously, and then unconsciously receiving the unwavering, invariable result of that behavior that is a law that must come down to us. That's what karma really is, folks. It's this idea of karma that if you do good things happen, and if you do bad things happen, is legitimate. It is real. It really is quite that simple, and it works just like that in the aggregate in society. I call it the law of freedom, to simplify it. Natural law to me is moral law. I'm not talking about the law of the jungle. I'm not talking about be the most ruthless and you'll come out on top. That's not natural law. That's what Darwinists, who are scientific, macrobiological Darwinian theorists, call the quote-unquote natural order. There's nothing natural in that, and it can never result in order. I'm talking about a set of moral laws that exist inherently in the universe that brings to us the consequences of the behaviors that we choose, whether they are in alignment with right or wrong behavior. And, people have to understand that this is what is ultimately the causal factor of what we are receiving in our lives. This is the natural law, the moral law is really the only law that there is. It's the only thing that is the causal agent of what we are experiencing in life. I call it the law of freedom. As an entire society becomes more moral, that society becomes more free. And as a society becomes more immoral in the aggregate, that society becomes more enslaved. So if you make the connection that we are an enslaved society, that we are an enslaved species, and you understand how freedom is dying in the world, you have to understand, if you are conscious in any way, that that is directly related to the overall morality of the people in that society in the aggregate sense. As more people are immoral, the society is more enslaved. As more people understand conscience, understand the objective difference between right behavior and wrong behavior, the society will invariably become freer and freer as more people choose right behavior over wrong behavior. So if you make the connection that we are basically, our freedom is dying and we are becoming more enslaved and we are going in that direction, you have to understand the causal factor for that is because as a whole, we are making immoral choices rather than moral ones.
Very, very well said. And we are. The thing is, we're trained to do it, like you say, through the education system. It's really interesting the way they've set it up. You've got these religious institutions which apparently preach love, although there is an undertone which would appear to be something very different. But you've got this whole concept of preaching love and tolerance, and then you go into the education system, you're trained to respect authority, and you get ostracized if you think outside the box, and then you're trained to function within the business world, and the business world is essentially a sociopathic system. You know, you've got to be a sociopath, you've got to be ruthless, you've got to claw your way to the top, and we place an economic value on everything. You touched on that before, you know, our need to support this economic model. I've spoken about this for so many years, Mark, and I don't know why people can't see it, that this economic system is basically the glue that holds the whole thing together, you know, and it's our need to support this economic model, which we put this above everything else, above our morals, above everything, you know. And you've got to ask, what is it that causes people to step outside their moral compass so willingly? Even police officers who often join the force because they want to do good, suddenly they're doing the most horrendous things for people, and sometimes they're even receiving counselling because, I know, why did this person push me so far that I had to do that to him? But they never ask themselves the question, why did you do it to him in the first place? What caused you to believe that doing that was doing the right thing? You know, getting through this, I mean, what is it, do you think, that causes people to think in this way and to believe they're doing right when they're doing something so obviously wrong?
Well, it's obviously because they're not being taught that there is a 100% objective code of morality that is unwavering and is not morally relative. Moral relativists believe that they can ultimately get to make the decision about whether something is right or wrong, and that could change with time or place or circumstance. And they are 100% opposed to even considering the notion that if a behavior is something that hurts or harms someone else, you shouldn't take it regardless of what the circumstance is. If you are harming their rights, their life, their property without any right to do so. And, you know, a lot of people, as they say, have good intentions. They're well-intentioned. And a lot of people want to make excuses for the well-intentioned and say, well, he had his heart in the right place. He had his mind in the right place. He wanted to do the right thing. But ultimately, here's what he chose to do, or here's what she chose to do instead. And there's all these excuses and justifications offered for why order followers somehow have good intentions but end up doing harm. And I think that's the whole problem with our society, is we're letting people slide entirely too much. We won't get up in their face and tell them that what they're doing is wrong. We're timid and afraid. We don't want to be harsh critics of their behavior. You know, we're afraid of what our friends and family might think if we speak out like that. And say, it doesn't make a difference what your intentions are. You need to know what rights are. The end. You need to know whether a behavior is a right or a wrong. And again, I keep going back to this and explaining to people the reason that we're losing our rights is we don't know what they are. How many people in the world, if you just stopped someone on the street and asked them, can you please define a human right for me, would be able to give the correct definition? And people will say, well, is there a correct definition? Yes, there is. There is absolutely a correct definition of what a right of a human being is. A right is a behavior taken by a human being that does not cause harm to another sentient being. Period. That's the definition of a right. That's the correct definition of a right. And how many people on the street would be able to spit back that definition, if asked, would be able to offer the correct definition for what a human right is? I would tell you it's probably less than 1% of the human population, and I'm probably being exceedingly generous with that estimation. And if people don't know what their rights are, do you think that they could protect something that they don't even know what it is? Do you think that they can preserve something that they don't even understand what it is? No chance. The overwhelming ignorance for what people know of as rights, or as the difference between objective right and wrong behavior, is staggeringly ignorant. The ignorance is appallingly monstrous. And I don't see it really getting any better because of the education system and because of the so-called value system that parents are teaching their children. They're teaching them money's all that matters, having a job that is all that matters, because, if you want to succeed in life, you have to have money, you have to have a job, etc. They're not teaching people that to be a true success in the world, it doesn't matter how much money you have, it doesn't matter what kind of job you have, it doesn't matter what kind of house you live in, how much money you have in the bank, what kind of car you drive, what kind of clothes you wear, or any other ridiculous set of measures that we so-called measure success according to. The main reason that anybody is successful or unsuccessful at human life is how much they know about whether the behaviors that they are choosing are right or wrong, and how much they are aligning their behavior to the right over the wrong. And if you gauge human success like that, the vast amount of people in this world are appalling failures at life, at human life, if that is the gauge for the success of a human being in life, whether they have learned the difference between right and wrong behavior, and then they have acted by choosing the right behavior over the wrong behavior. And if you gauge our whole society according to that measuring stick, we are a complete failure as a race of people, unfortunately.
Well said, Mark. That's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, Mike. We ask these questions and you go at it like a bull at a gate, but it's just the blatant truth. It's just the blatant truth. It really is. Like, even with the so-called independent media and the so-called awakened community, what do you